Welcome back to Curious Crossroads. Today we had the privilege to interview Jeff Booth. Jeff Booth is the author of The Price of Tomorrow. He's an entrepreneur and he's an incredibly influential person in the Bitcoin community. We had a great time hanging out. He sat down with us for an hour and it was a great podcast.
And what I liked about him is he puts it in layman terms. He takes his time. So if you're like me and you're wondering what's Bitcoin all about, this is a really good episode to watch. Today we welcome Jeff Booth. He is the author of The Price of Tomorrow and a highly respected voice in the Bitcoin community. Jeff will be sharing his insights on the deflationary forces transforming our economy and why Bitcoin is essential for the future. Jeff, welcome to Curious Crossroads.
Thanks for having me, Doug and Doug.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I guess if we can start, can you just tell us a little bit about your background? I know you're kind of first and foremost an entrepreneur, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I think that's an entrepreneur is probably the best way to label that. How do you label what you do in something that's easy? I dropped out of university to go into first real estate. Then I created a real estate company. Then I created a building company. After my building company, I founded a tech company selling building products, like an Amazon of building supplies, and which grew to quite a large size and kind of their internet days, early internet days. And I built that until 2017. The whole process of doing that and all the lessons learned and all the mistakes I made and everything else just kind of also let me see that everything I was building was also to provide value, right? You were using technology to provide value to people, and the output of that was prices fall. And I couldn't understand why prices weren't falling broadly in the overall market if that was the state of what the world looked like. As entrepreneurs competed for that to create value. Out of that process, I wrote the book, The Price of Tomorrow, that described two different systems, the one that we should live in versus the one we lived in and measured from. And that took me into really a deep understanding of how Bitcoin was the thing that allowed us to move to an honest system. It allowed the world to transition from one system that couldn't work to a system that would help everyone on the planet.
So why don't you take us into that? I know your book, kind of like what you mentioned, it talks about how we're in this like conflict between inflation and this deflationary that's happening through AI, technology, innovation, different things like that. And then you also mentioned too, from what I've seen, you say all prices drop to the marginal cost of production. Can you just kind of go into that and explain what that means?
Why this is hard to understand for people is if you think, and I mean everybody, including me, along the journey to understand Bitcoin, because you have to let go of what you've always known, and we've always lived in the same system, essentially an extractive system that for us to win, somebody else had to lose, and that extractive system, it would appear you were winning if you were in the country extracting the most. Right, or at the top of the capital stack, it would appear you were winning, but somebody else had to lose for us to win. And so that same system is the same system that all history books are written through, right? And we've gone to we go over and over to war to reset that system, and then promise not to do it again, and then start that system again. And it's based on the natural state of the free market is deflation. And most people, like you're doing now, like you're both doing now, nod their heads to that because it just feels right? You know what I just said is true. It's a first principle that's true. And by starting there, and then you can go deeper into that discussion. And why wouldn't that be true? Or why is it true? Is because every entrepreneur competing for value has to compete with what was there before. And unless they provide more value, we don't use it. So it fails in the market. So the only way that they could have success is the output is more value and prices fall. And so all people in that equation win. The former monopoly doesn't win, but prices float naturally to society through that process. And that process is so uber competitive that there can't be a monopoly in that for long. Because what would happen in a monopoly is prices would rise for the monopoly, and every idea created by entrepreneurs would attack the highest prices and find a way to bring prices down. So that process is exactly why your calculator app is free on your phone, as most of your apps are free on your phone. AI is free. In most cases, it's going to free. And that process underlies all of human action in a free market, because we're competing to provide value. So where would entrepreneurs go? Where they could provide the most value, which is typically what has the highest margins or cost structure. So when you explore that, you realize everything I just described is true, but we've never experienced it. So what does that mean, right? So what it means is we've never lived in a truly global free market. Never. We don't have any pattern recognition of what it could even look like, because we've never lived in it. And all of the books we've ever written are control structures instead of global free markets. And then so what ends up happening, the cognitive dissonance in your brain by understanding one thing's true, that what I said is true here, and you don't want to admit that you've never lived in a global free market, that you live in a control system. You don't want to admit that. So you start making excuses for the control system. You conflate things. You start to say, well, we can't live in a global free market. And you'd have to ask, why? Why would that be? So by saying we can't live in a global free market, what you're really saying is, I believe that it's okay for somebody to steal from people, so we can trade with each other.
We can try to justify why it's okay to be wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And that's that cognitive dissonance, Doug. And I think every single person in their understanding of Bitcoin goes through the same thing, because you have to let go of previous held beliefs that are inconsistent with information that you know is right. And so that dance where people try to marry these two incompatible systems is exactly what ends up happening. And it becomes too hard for some people. So they just they call names or that can't be true. And they essentially put their head in the sand and want to ignore it. But it is true. And so the debt-based monetary system that we're in now, if we want to explain the other system, if you looked at the entire asset stack on top of the debt, you have $900 trillion of assets, in tangible assets, intangible assets, brand, goodwill, but $900 trillion of assets. And those assets on the bottom of that pyramid have $323 trillion of debt, according to the IMF. They have $65 trillion of debt, which was found 2 years ago, found by in off-balance sheets, and they have $200 trillion of derivatives debt exposure, and a whole bunch of other unfunded liabilities. So you have this debt underneath this that is insolvent already. And if it's already insolvent, and that means every single asset inside that system also has a counterparty risk to that insolvent debt. And from that system, we wouldn't let that system fail. Right? So when people say, I can't believe the government does this, they are part of it. Make sense? Right? Because if that system failed, if all that debt collapsed, then every asset value and all your way of life on top of that would also collapse. It would all go to zero. Your house would be worth pennies, right?
And so you're saying
there would be no money. There would be no money left, because the whole thing is based on credit. And if the credit was allowed to default, everything would fail.
So why can't we go on the way we're going on?
Or why can't we pay back the debt? Why is that?
So just take a fraction of that debt, say 400 trillion of that debt, a fraction. If you tried to pay back that debt at $1 a second, it would take 12,873,000 years to pay back. So how old is humanity on this planet? Right? So you start to see the insanity of that debt. It's such an outrageous number, but it gets more outrageous. And this is what I don't think a lot of people really understood this, even so, like sometimes, many times through my book, they still didn't kind of get what I was really saying. The rise of the debt is, if you just said the deflationary aspect that you can't allow a credit-based system to experience because it would default, is the same thing as the debt rise, right? It's the other side of that coin, because it has to manipulate money. It has to make prices go up at an ever faster rate to counter effect the deflationary pressure in the market driven by the free market. And as a result of that counter effect, it has to misallocate capital. It has to make government bigger. It has to take your individual rights and freedoms, and it has to do that on a timeline that gets more and more centralized by all of the actors inside that system, because it's not the free market. It's not close to the free market, and it has to get worse. It has to degrade further and further. If you take a look at what Trump or Elon is talking about today and saying they're going to gut government spending, if you did that, you would create a deflationary collapse, because all of those people who have jobs, the jobs might be bullshit jobs, but they have jobs. They're getting paid. They're buying food. They're buying trips. They're buying cars. They're buying all of this stuff. And if you take all of that amount of employees out of the system, there is not enough jobs to make up in the free market for those people. Everything stops. So why they're doing they're talking about that and tariffs and all of these things at the same time is they have to drive way more printing of money or manipulation of money in the structure that we have in a debt-based economy. That's the credit-based economy that's insolvent already.
So it's a catch-22. Even though we want to trim the fat, if you do, those people have to go somewhere.
The rise of the government spending is actually a second order derivative of stopping this. It's a natural effect of government gets bigger, and you could allow it to all collapse, but that collapse is your entire credit-based system that everything else sits on top of. So even if you go back to 1930 and the what people are scared about the deflation, people are scared when they hear deflation, they hear the Great Depression. And so, but the Great Depression wasn't caused by deflation. The Great Depression was caused by a run-up exuberance in the 20s that couldn't be paid back. And then you had a deflationary collapse into that. But even and then trying to stop that deflationary collapse, that's why they seized gold and tried to reflate the economy. And so this is throughout time, it's been the same cycle over and over. This pendulum swings back and forth. And Bitcoin resolves that paradox. And it resolves that paradox quite simply because of this. If you were looking at the existing system that I've been describing through the fiat-based currency, no matter where you were in the world through the fiat-based currency, you as the observer, all prices would be rising, right? And in your reality, that would be true, right? And you wouldn't know that it was actually because government was manipulating money, and that's why the only reason prices were rising is because government was manipulating money, diluting your currency, right? And if you were inside that bubble of, call it 7.8 billion people, right? 7.9 billion people. If you were inside that bubble and you were at the top of the bubble, if you were at the top of the wealth ladder within that bubble, you would think everything was great, right? And if you were at the bottom of that bubble, you'd think, because you had the assets and they weren't losing value as fast, they were holding their value. But at the bottom of that bubble, you didn't have the assets. Your cash was getting destroyed and getting transferred to those people. you would see the world getting way, way worse. And you probably inside that bubble, both the rich and the poor would reference you as an observer in that system. You would divide against the rich and poor. You would go to government, both sides, and try to get your policies to help you out. And the world would look like that for you, and it would be real for you. If you were in holding Bitcoin and pricing it in US dollars as an observer, you would have a 45% IRR for the last 16 years. And all of your other assets inside that system would have 6 to 8 to 4% IRR for the last 16 years. And it would look like Bitcoin was outperforming all your other assets, and that would also be true. If you were actually in Bitcoin and not thinking about the other system, it would reprice the entire other system because it's the only thing without counterparty risk to the other system. And all prices relative to Bitcoin would fall forever. And that would also be true. So isn't Bitcoin's imposing a discipline on the world, and every observer, depending where they are in their journey, sees this as something totally different.
This episode is brought to you by Trezor. Protect your Bitcoin like a pro with the Trezor Safe 5. Engineered with cutting-edge security, this hardware wallet keeps your crypto safe from hacks and theft. Trezor Safe 5 makes securing your Bitcoin simple, reliable, and stress-free. Take control of your digital assets today. Visit Trezor.io and secure your future with the Trezor Safe 5. Now back to the show. So that people can visualize the deflation that you're talking about that we don't see because of inflation, can you give the example of the calculator app and just like how that price has gone down so people can visualize it?
What ends up happening in and forget technology, but for anything, in the free market, somebody creates value. And then that value, and for a while, they have margin because of that value. And the calculator app would have been a good example. The early calculator apps people paid for. And they either paid for through advertising or they paid for through, so a whole bunch of different models to be able to create money for the calculator app. Some people paid $1 a month. Some people had advertising models, and then people chose which ones they wanted. And then the market would say, okay, well, I have a better calculator app. I have a better one, because there's money there to be made. And so entrepreneurs, and they don't care. Those entrepreneurs don't care if you're in the US or some, because the technology is ubiquitous. And they could create that technology anywhere, India, Pakistan, Malaysia, anywhere. Global entrepreneurs saying, if I create this line of code, I can make money too. And it competes until there's no money, not even 1 cent left in it, and it becomes free. And then those entrepreneurs do the same thing onto a different thing with money in it. And so that's the process of free market, which also shows that there's no such thing as a monopoly in a free market for any length of time.
And you're saying that happens across all industries, but we might just not see it because of the system we're in.
You've probably heard me say this countless times, but you can't measure a system problem from the system. And so people are measuring, all their measurements are from that system of the assets and debt and the monetary system that lives on top. And even though they know it's insolvent, even when I say it's insolvent, what do? They go back to that system and they spend all their time in that system because that's the system they're measuring from. It's what all their friends are measuring from. It's where their jobs are, the money, everything is thing. And so they can't see what a new system would look like. Why this is so hard is because literally you don't have the mental lattice to see what the new system could look like, because we're comparative creatures. We're looking at past to be able to project the future, unless you've done a lot of work on this to imagine what it looks like by this new protocol imposing a new discipline that there's complete change from any history we've ever lived in. Unless you've done all of that work, it's really hard to grasp what I'm saying. Right? But you can imply, if you just, that's actually why the better way to do it is just ask a first principle question. Is the free market deflationary, and why? What would what would a new protocol that was decentralized and secure, that didn't care what I'm saying, every 10 minutes there's a new block, imposing, and it was bounded by energy, what would that system be telling you about that, what I just described in the free market? And what you would see is, from Bitcoin, if you're truly for pricing in Bitcoin, if you're truly not just pricing Bitcoin, living in Bitcoin, you're in the early innings of living in the first global free market that's ever existed.
So can you give an example then, if we price things in Bitcoin, what it looks like?
This house that I'm sitting in right now, because I price in Bitcoin, 4 years ago today was, call it 98 Bitcoin. Today, this house is about 14 Bitcoin. In fiat dollars, in Canadian dollars, this house went from 1.4 million to 2.1 million in that same time period. So, and why would both those exist, and why would that look like that in a house example? So why do people buy more than one house, right? And they buy more than one house, and many houses, or even one house, they buy it because their money's no good, and money has become a store of value against money being no good. So the store of value, then your house isn't a utility that you raise your family in anymore for most people, because they can't afford it. The house becomes an investment class and prices out those people because it's created a monetary premium. So a house is no longer a utility. It's a store of value because you can't store your value in money. Mm-hmm. So then, as everybody does, as the free market does the same thing, house values appear to be rising really fast. They're actually not rising. The dollar is losing value against it, but it appears to all those people that are in it to be the only thing holding its value. So more and more people do it, and everybody does it. And they don't see the risk created by the same action that they're all doing, because it's the only place to store your value. Or you could say stocks are the same. And people don't see the risk of how outrageous valuations are in stocks for the same thing, because they're measuring from within that system, and it appears to be better than all of the other things. From the other system, my house is falling to its utility value, not when it will, as it's doing it. It's doing it right now. Every 4-year cycle, you can see the same thing. In 4 years, this house will be probably worth under one Bitcoin.
What do you say to the people then that say, we had a gold standard, we had scarce money already? Why did that not work? There was inequalities, there was monopolies then. Bitcoin is similar to gold. Why would gold or Bitcoin work now?
It's not similar to gold in a couple specific ways. It's similar in Bitcoin's more finite, but because it's a network and you can trade it with velocity around the world, unlimited velocity around the world, you have a final bearer instrument inside the network. Whereas gold had to be, essentially for gold to work, as economies grew, you created a paper instrument or derivative instrument on top of gold. And when you did that, you centralized the gold. And when you did that, let's use a bank. Let's use, by the way, I'm going to go back a second. The rise of the U.S. was because of the protection of individual rights and freedoms. And a part of that in the Constitution was about hard money. It was about gold. And so a whole bunch of people left Europe to have more ideas competing in the free market. That was the rise of the U.S. becoming a superpower. And now let's play that out in the late 1800s, early 1900s on what that would look like. And so now you're starting to centralize banks. So you have a free market banking movement. And some of those banks, and let's say each of you, Doug's, own a bank, I own a bank. And Doug Sr. owns a bank, and he says, I'm going to reserve at 50% your gold. I'm going to lend it out 2-to-1. And Doug Jr. says, I'm going to be 30%, and I'm going to give you a higher interest rate. And I say, I'm going to do 10%, and I'm going to give a way higher interest rate. What does the population do? They go to me, right? Because I'm giving a higher interest rate. What does that do? In the boom, it sounds like everybody's making money, everything. And that now there's a collapse, there's a boom bust, fear and greed drive all markets. There's a bust. People come back to get the gold from my bank. It's not there. So what do those people do? They go to the government and they say, hey, can you protect me from these bad people? And the government comes in and says, I'm going to regulate this industry. I'm going to consolidate these banks and make less banks, and I'm going to protect you. And the whole thing just moves up a stack. And that's how you get the Federal Reserve. And that's how you get to control of money through that process. And that's why I'm kind of fond of saying it's not them, it's us. Right? We do this to ourselves. Because this same thing is going to play out on Bitcoin. A whole bunch of people are going to centralize their Bitcoin in third-party actors, and they're going to get destroyed. And they're going to take leverage. They're going to play leverage games on Bitcoin, and all they have to do is stay outside the system and self-custody, and all prices forever will fall against Bitcoin. But they won't. They will try to beat that. They'll take yield products just like FTX. That whole game is going to get played again, and lots of people are going to get liquidated because because it's human nature to try to out-achieve that return.
So you would totally be against Bitcoin ETFs then?
So I don't want to actually, no, I actually don't want to say I'm against Bitcoin ETFs because I think about this as a journey of understanding. And now that you have this giant funnel of some people taking the first steps to their journey.
Right.
And a lot of those people will eventually be self-custodial and running nodes, and they all won't be. Some of them are going to get hurt, right? But that process of this change is going to create way more people who understand what Bitcoin is.
For there to be a Bitcoin economy, it has to be mass acceptance. How far off would you see something like that coming into play where it's just an everyday thing? Where, I mean, do you think there's a timeline, or is it just...
Yeah, so...
Does something have to take place that hurts us bad before it comes into play?
No, I don't think that all of these things are going to happen along the way, but I know lots of people that live in a fully Bitcoin economy right now. Completely. I can't completely here in Vancouver. Yeah. But I spend in it every day, and I will, and if two vendors, that I'll choose the one that takes Bitcoin and I'll pay in Bitcoin. And so what drives that, Doug? Think about this in a couple different ways. Today, the entire world has become accustomed to paying to take payments in a currency that's losing value, and they think it's normal.
Yep.
And on Enlightening and some of the stuff that Breeze is doing and other companies is, you don't have to pay to take payments, right? So what will the businesses do that are not having to have that sucking sound of their margins going to pay to take payments in the depreciating currency? They're going to offer you better deals. And the market's going to just naturally move, and it might move first in Africa or places where the payments aren't 2.5%, they're 10%, but it's going to move.
And we see this big interest now in Bitcoin from our media because of the price that it's related to with the dollar.
Yeah.
So on one hand, it hurts Bitcoin, but on the other hand, it's getting people interested in Bitcoin. And I would imagine your big concern is that people might just be using it as a
trade.
Yeah. So I think about it. But I don't judge anybody for thinking about it the way they want to think about it. Right. The way the free market works is there's a whole bunch of different ideas, and if we find better ways through the competition of those ideas, it's the way that everything has always worked. And so I'm okay with, I have a different view than somebody else on this, and I'm okay for them to be able to, like, I don't have a judge of a Bitcoiner has to look like this. We're all different, right? I look at these two systems are incompatible. The free market is incompatible with an inflationary monetary system. And so if you're measuring from the inflationary monetary system Bitcoin, then you're eventually likely going to be on the wrong side of the trade. but just that process of what we're talking about inspires for you guys to reach out to me to have this podcast to be
Exactly.
able to teach other people on and that's going to that what I just said is going to cut across people's brains, and they won't get it, right? And it'll go back to the existing system, but eventually, just as mind after mind gets infected and understand what we're actually doing, what's happening, more and more people kind of move, and that's just the way the world's always changed.
How long did it take you before you had your aha moment with Bitcoin? Was it like after reading something like the Bitcoin Standard, or where were you? I mean, how long of an education did it take you to just all of a sudden go,
And was that before or after you wrote your book when you came across Bitcoin?
So I came across Bitcoin before I wrote my book. I
Okay.
owned a bit in 2017, but that would have been a trade. It was just almost a pet project, and it was a small amount. And in writing my book, I started to realize that I started to really get into Bitcoin, and I started to so that would have been 2018, 2019 that I really started to understand this. And then kind of after the book, I still thought at the end of the book, I thought it's a plausible path, but there was a likelihood that it would get centralized and or insecure at some point. And I probably spent 10,000 hours trying to break what I just said. So it was almost a counter to try to to discard what I'm saying now, that got me deeper and deeper to understand Bitcoin and what it is and how it really is us. If you're running a node, you're part of the network, right? And for you to, and as you understand, go back to 1992 on the cryptography mailing list when there were so the cypherpunk mailing list, when there's 70 people on that list. How many people now? And so all of the failures, all of the different things to be able to get to the insight that Satoshi brought us, 2009, and then now, how many more than 70 people? Then those 70 people knew kind of what the stakes were to just wrestle money away from the state. They knew what would happen. I didn't. I was so many years later, right? How many more people like you have joined those people running nodes and are protectors of Bitcoin? We are the defenders of this decentralized and secure protocol. And there's hundreds of thousands of people around the world. So it becomes us. We're constantly looking for attacks. We're constantly looking for a way to ensure that this is decentralized and secure. And more people are joining us every day.
with me as a little bit older coming into Bitcoin, the cold wallet can be a scary thing to somebody, especially when you think about, oh, geez, what if I lose that wallet, or what if but there's safeguards for that. I mean, it's not necessarily where if you lose your cold wallet, you're out the money that was in that cold wallet.
Yeah, especially if you set it up in multi-sig or some of your sharing in Trezor or something. That there's a whole bunch of different ways, novel ways to be able to keep back that up in a very secure way. But Doug, you mentioned something really important: the accountability, and because we're used to trusting somebody else with our money. We're not used to trusting and doing the work to understand it ourselves. But we believe the money is safe in that institution, and they build big walls and beautiful buildings with the money that's actually stolen from us, right? On that system to have the appearance of safety when it's really not safe. So that understanding that piece and taking the accountability to make sure it's safe. But the first time you do it, oh wow. And there, I don't know one person, including me, that the first time you did it was, is it still there? Do I have this?
Right. Yep.
and we teach our friends all the time now, and every single time it's exactly the same thing. And then it's only through that practice and realizing, wait, you are completely immune from all of the other nonsense, and you can secure this in it whatever fashion you want, a whole bunch of different ways, whatever, and be completely secure. And over time, it becomes second nature.
I just want to go back for a second. I got a question. So what do you think would have been better if we stayed on the gold standard, or was there actually a reason to go to fiat at some point for the growth in the economy? Is there some benefit to fiat at least for the short term?
No,
Not at all.
no, not at all. It's just a control system. So the benefit is you can wage war and control others. And so we found a really effective way to do that by going to fiat, because you don't have to ask your citizens to vote for endless wars. You just print more money.
Did we see more growth than if we would have been on a gold standard?
No, it's probably, you can't measure a counterfactual, but if you just ask first principles, that if the natural state of the free market is deflation, and what that world would look like, 8 billion people in service of 8 billion people, and it would be faster growth because all of the productivity would be flowing to in the form of lower prices. So you think the jobs are needed because they're needed to be able to support this nonsense debt. So everybody's working harder and harder on mice wheels forever, but the jobs actually wouldn't be needed. And I'm not saying we wouldn't find problems to solve. The problems would be solved at a way faster pace because that's what the free market does. It attacks those problems. There's not the misallocation of capital to be able to say this person can win and this person can't. And then there's not the expansion of government to be able to have all of the regulation that slows down the capital process. It moves faster. Now, when I'm saying this, I realize for people measuring the system from the system, it's going to be really hard the first time they see this. Mm-hmm. But I am absolutely convinced that the world we would be living in, the rate of progress would be way faster than it looks like today if it was a free market. It is. We're measuring the rate of progress through a manipulated lens, and it still looks fast.
If you actually use Bitcoin as the tool to price in, it would be easier to see real growth and economic growth through deflation, right? Because you could actually, it pairs with it.
You should be measuring economic growth and productivity growth through deflation, not through a manipulated money supply. So the measure that most people are measuring productivity growth from is through the nonsense measure of the manipulation of money. Of course, it's obscure.
The way you see the world right now, you said you price everything in Bitcoin. So like if you look at your guitar, are you thinking in Bitcoin terms right away?
Yep.
That to me is kind of tough because I've been trying to do that too, just like looking at cars, looking at any object. I'm just trying to tell myself how much it is in Bitcoin. It's almost like learning a new language because it's
exactly.
Like you're translating, you want to translate the cash to how much it would be in Bitcoin every time you look at an object. But is that how you do it? Do you just start looking at everything in those terms?
That's what you do. That's exactly what you do. And that learning of that new language is exactly what's required because you're living in a language that's manipulated.
And did you say that you're already purchasing your goods almost exclusively with Bitcoin?
I can't in Vancouver right now. In some regions of the world that I go to in Madeira, I purchased just about everything. I went to, so when we did the Madeira conference in March of this year, there was, I think, 26 businesses, 34 businesses that were on Bitcoin, accepting Bitcoin. When I went back just in October, there were 136. So you literally have a circular economy emerging there. So the second time I went back, the restaurants I went to, everywhere I went, I used Bitcoin.
I believe so. Ken Sim, is that his name? He's the mayor of Vancouver.
Yep.
So they're trying to turn into like a Bitcoin. I don't know are they trying to incorporate Bitcoin in Vancouver or what are they trying to do there? And I think you had some influence on that.
Yeah, Ken's a good friend of mine, and he started understanding. It was same thing, like we all do. But he read my book early on. He started to take an interest in it. He started to purchase it himself, understand this, do the same work that I did. And then over time, he realized that none of the problems in the city, and I helped him understand this, but none of the problems in the city could be solved from that same system because they're taxing people and money And by the time they go to pay the services and that money that they just charged people, the services cost more. Right. And so it's just a perpetual loop that makes the city poorer and poorer and poorer, just like it would be if you were an individual pricing the world from a manipulated currency, and you were now pricing from Bitcoin. It's exactly the same thing at a city, as same thing as a country. So by holding Bitcoin in reserve, then they're protecting the purchasing power of the taxpayers of the city, and that purchasing power can go further over time. And and again, everything I just said, we know is true when looking at Bitcoin and doing the work on Bitcoin. But why this seems so hard is most people measuring from the other system don't know that yet. Right. So he's put forward a motion. The motion was passed. They're going to study this. They're going to study it for the next couple months, 3 months, and hopefully put forward a motion to be able to build a balance sheet, make Vancouver Bitcoin City.
And our new administration here that's going to be coming into play is talking about having a reserve of Bitcoin. I can't help but think that'll be a big push for people to understand Bitcoin more.
Yeah, and I think, Doug, when you say that, like every one of your podcast is one, right? Other people this is I'm fond of saying this is imposing a new discipline on the world, because if you have something that's truly decentralized, secure, bounded by energy, then it's imposing a new reality. You could not believe in that reality. You can yell at Bitcoin all you want, but it doesn't care. It doesn't care, right? It's, if you want to price the world in a piece of paper, and you think all prices are going to go rise versus that piece of paper, then it'll be true for you. But it won't be for somebody pricing a Bitcoin. It won't be true for. And this is, so that new reality is being imposed around the world. And again, you have the first global free market emerging on Bitcoin, 8 billion people in service of 8 billion people. And nobody has to wait. You don't have to wait for your government to say, now it's okay. You don't have to wait. If you're in North Korea, you don't have to wait. You don't, anywhere. It removes the power from people to usurp ours with money.
When can I go to a gas station though and pay in Bitcoin and pay in sats? Like, how far down the road is that when I can go to any local store and start actually using Bitcoin as money and not just a store of value?
I think your dad just perfectly explained kind of what would happen there in your administration, in the administration. So what do you think that's going to happen? You can see it in Pennsylvania. You can see it in Texas. Some of the individual states are already further ahead than the federal government. And now there's this competition starting to emerge, and it started with El Salvador. El Salvador was one of the most backwards nations, right, and desperately poor. And buying a Bitcoin a day, I think they're going to be debt free in 2029. And so they're becoming a wealthier nation. Their crime rate is next to nothing, and it's because the free market is emerging there, and people see, and then people move there. Talent and capital is attracted to the best places that preserve talent and capital, and so there's now a global race that's emerging. Because your question about gas station or McDonald's or whatever, you can buy all of those things in El Salvador. You just can't in your country yet. And what's going to happen is, unless your country does it, they'll be surpassed by a different country that doesn't.
I've just always heard that there's issues with scaling. Is that an issue, or is that just no?
Not at all. Not at all. So we run a fund called EgoDesk.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I get to see everything that's coming. Yeah, if you understand Bitcoin from a protocol layer, right? So what this entire conversation, what we've been talking mostly about is the store of value layer, the decentralized secure protocol bounded by energy, and that made trade-offs in that base layer to not scale, so it could retain decentralization and security. So, but what ends up happening is protocols come in layers and they ossify. Right. And so if you take about a look and kind of an analogy to that, TCP/IP, the base layer of the internet, which is the base layer of the same thing we're on right now on Riverside, was developed by DARPA in 1969, 68, 60, late 60s. And it took till 1989 until Tim Berners-Lee created HTTP. And that was the fourth layer on top of that stack. So it took 20 years before the internet as we know it could emerge. And it took another 20 years, more than that, before this thing we're on right now could emerge from that. All the entrepreneurs created value on top of that protocol, and it became more and more robust. So what does that say? Each layer does a very narrow thing, and ossifies, gets harder and harder and harder, because if you build a layer on top of it until it's mature, it fails, right? Or it has risk. So the choice of Bitcoin staying decentralized and secure and bounded by energy, that is the thing that kept it decentralized, secure, bounded by energy, but prevented its scale. And then, 4 or 5 years ago, when Lightning first came out, and so second layer of the protocol, and you could say Liquid is too, second layer of the transaction protocol on top of that, what would it look like at first? What it would look like at first is a garage project, right? How protocols develop. It would look like a backyard hobbyist project, and people would come in, and it wouldn't work, and you'd have channel locks. Payments wouldn't work all the time, as it was ossifying, as it's getting better and better and better, better and better. And now you have payments that are 95, 96%. They work all at that time, and pretty soon they'll be 99.999. And for payments to work on something, and that's why people don't see how fast it's coming, because they're looking backwards, and then they say Lightning can't scale because they looked at what it was 2 or 3 years ago. They try all of these other coins because they don't understand protocols, and protocols emerge like I just described. And then what ends up happening is other things get built on top of that. Sediment is a good example to be able to scale further. Nostr is a good example of what scales further. And some of those some of those protocol layers are still early in their development. So people don't understand what's coming because they're looking backwards. So no, Bitcoin, there's already the technology right now. There's already the protocols layers that can deliver Bitcoin to 8 billion people on this planet right now without any further builds. There'd be tinkering and everything else, but no, it scales fine.
So as far as transactional protocols, you're talking about some of the countries already are using it for McDonald's or what have you.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, you're not able to bring your cold wallet in now and like put it in. I mean, do they have like, this may sound like stupid, but I mean, is it like now when we go to get gas, we've got a card that we can put in and it takes money out of our, what are they doing there to simplify the transaction?
Do you have a Lightning wallet, Doc?
I do not.
I do. So I have a custodial wallet.
Yeah, download a Lightning wallet. There's custodial ones or non-custodial or self-custodial ones, and they're all interoperable with each other, and they work all the time. They never did 5 years ago. They never did 3 years ago, but there's countless options. And what's happening is it works exactly like cash does if comparing these. I used to go, I stored my money at the bank. I would go take out the bank machine. I would put money in my wallet, and I'd spend the money in my wallet. Now I have a Swiss vault. I don't store my money in the bank. I have a hard, cold wallet, Swiss vault myself. I transfer money to my wallet. I pay in my wallet.
See, I think that's the kind of education that people need to hear about that are naive to Bitcoin, is how easy the transaction protocol can actually become, just as simple as what you're doing now.
It's global right now. I don't need any permission. There's no fees. There's a routing fees, but they're just fractions of pennies. And I can send money to you right now on this call. Maybe I should. or to India or to anywhere in the world peer to peer right now without permission. And so and it's super simple, and people don't even know it's there right now. It's growing so fast. We invested in a company. Um, I won't say, but from ego death perspective, what we're looking at, and this is what I still, if you're measuring the existing system. So I said before, 45% is the risk-free rate to return. That's a non-counterparty risk-free rate. You don't have any risk of all the counterparty of the existing system. And that is the last 16 years of return against Bitcoin. So how would you beat that return? You would invest in companies that are building the railroads on top of it, and they would be denominating their balance sheets in Bitcoin. And so when I see what's happening in our portfolio at EgoDeath and the rate of growth, and the rate of growth is staggering, and they're turning profitable pretty quickly, and their balance sheets are growing in Bitcoin. So a simple analogy to that would be if you were in Argentina in 1999 and you saw another protocol emerging, the internet, and you could move your money from Argentina to Google, and you could invest in Google and have the cash flows in US dollars instead of Argentina, then you would have the win of the cash flows being in US currency plus the rate of growth of the internet. That's what we're doing right now. And what we believe is everybody lives in Argentina but us. They just don't know it. Exactly.
What are your thoughts on Michael Saylor and what he's doing by?
I think he's doing great, right on that. I think that there's a potential that the stock doesn't have the same run up as it's already had, and that's because now other businesses are going to compete with that, and with the new accounting rules, a lot of the businesses that were arbing into his company because he did it first can now do it themselves, and so that means the NAV premium to MicroStrategy might come down, or you could say at some point will come down. I just don't know at what point. But Michael's a genius, and he's done an incredible job in building this. He's a friend.
Can you just explain real quick what he's doing for the people that are listening?
Yeah. So effectively, he's providing a window into a whole bunch of other people who can't allocate to Bitcoin, and giving them different. Let's use a bond fund. A bond fund can't that can't invest in equity, has to invest in a bond, right? And if you're a government bond or something else, you have to invest in a bond. But bonds are losing value, and so he can provide a bond to take that money to be able to then buy a Bitcoin with it and return capital to the bond. It would far outpace most bond funds, because his equity is pricing in Bitcoin. So he's taken an entire capital stack of all the different people that are wanting to get this asset, the only risk-free rate of return in the world, that type of rate, and he's leveraging boatloads of capital to be able to buy more Bitcoin.
So he's even able to dilute the stock, sell those shares, and then buy Bitcoin with it.
Exactly. His ATM, it was the biggest ATM I think ever announced. $21 billion at the market, where he would essentially dilute his shareholders by $21 billion, and his stock went up. It's just wild.
It's insane. Bitcoin or AI, which one do you think is going to have a bigger impact on society?
They're tethered, and they're
connected.
They're connected, and they're connected because AI is a massive productivity force multiplier that should be flowing to us in the form of lower prices. And without Bitcoin, AI would be centralized against us.
If you could improve one aspect of Bitcoin, is there anything that you would improve?
No. No, I wouldn't right now. So I'm in the camp of ossifying the base layer, and I'll be open to different things that emerge that are needed, but I'm not in a camp of making changes for change's sake. So, because I think what ends up happening is people can't see what the other layers will do. So they're wanting their pet project into the base layer, which creates a greater risk.
And then just last thing, if you had to maybe explain Bitcoin to a skeptic in just a few sentences, what would you say to him?
I would say the natural state of the free market is deflation. Deal with it.
All right.
Find a way. Bitcoin's the only way to resolve the paradox of what I just said.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being on. Really appreciate it. I think it was a great conversation. It's
hope to have you back again.
Yeah, that'd be great in the future. But thanks so much.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, guys.